Hi, thanks so much, Donna. Hi, everybody. I'm Krista Egger, Director of Enterprise Green Communities, and happy to be with you today to talk about the criteria and the certification program. And I'm joined here with Shelby O'Neill, who's also on our certification team and will be helping address any of the questions that come through today. So, Donna, are we able to look at the results of the polling that attendees were answering as they signed on?
I'm going to try to make that come visible. Let's see what happens. Depends on how WebEx is feeling today. Let me know if you see it.
I do.
Oh.
Thanks for that, working that magic there. So it looks like 75% of the people who answered the first question about do you have experience with the 2015 Enterprise Green Communities criteria or not said yes, and then 25% said no. And then there's the question about primary role, so design, development, construction, operations, resident services, policy, finance, and other. Most people, 56%, fall into that development category. We've got about a third in design, and one or two people in operations and the other category. So great. Thanks for joining today. Those of you all who selected yes, that you're already familiar with the 2015 criteria and certification program, we won't be covering any groundbreaking information today. The criteria and the certification process have not changed since the last OHA QAP round last summer, with the exception of we've released an updated FAQ about the criteria, and we've released an updated addenda about the criteria since this time last year, and those are up on our public website, and I'll highlight some areas that we've included in that here today. But what I'll be focusing on for this next hour or so is a brief overview of certification, the criteria, and then a few just nuts and bolts about how to start your certification application in our online portal if you have not yet done so. And then we'll just also check on the deadlines for submitting your application to our team so that you can ensure that you can get your hopefully approved pre-build application back to OHA by the time of their deadline this October. So with that, I'll move right along. So the agenda today is Introduction to Enterprise Green Communities, highlights of the 2015 criteria, focus a little bit on how a project earns certification, and then a little bit on just tools and resources that we have available for you on our public website. So as many of you know, Enterprise is a national nonprofit organization formed about 35 years ago by Mr. Jim Rouse, who you see here. He says, we believe, because it is true, that people are affected by their environment, by space and scale, by color and texture, by nature and beauty, that they can be uplifted, made to feel important. And we're trying to infuse these types of qualities in these affordable housing projects that are being built in the state of Ohio. And one way that we're doing that is by focusing on sustainability, so a triple bottom line of social, environmental, and economic impacts. We established our green initiative at Enterprise about 13 years ago in 2004, because at that time there was no pathway or real resources available for the affordable housing sector to consider how to holistically green what they do. And so we've been operating that green initiative ever since that point in time, and our criteria has really been the hallmark of that initiative's work. We've, of course, updated the criteria over the years, and our currently active version is the 2015 version of the criteria. We started our certification process a few years ago in 2010. That's what we'll be talking about here today. So over the years, we've grown in terms of our impact around the country. We have more than 100,000 units in our pipeline. We're active in more than 39 states. All of the blue ones that you see here, Alabama will soon be turning blue, and we have a couple of others on the books too. Specifically in the state of Ohio, we've certified more than 6,660 units across 134 projects, and nearly 9,000 units in addition to that are in our queue. They've been approved for pre-build, so they've been approved right after the design stage and are being built right now, and we'll anticipate certifying them when they come online. So we're really happy to work with stakeholders across the state of Ohio and get your feedback on the program and do what we can to support you in your sustainability efforts. So the Green Communities criteria includes these 8 different categories. Collectively, they reflect an ambitious yet achievable framework. You know, we're not just focused on energy efficiency. We're not just focused on health. We're really concerned with taking a holistic approach to building and operating affordable housing so that it performs well in all of these different categories, and considering what the ramifications are to one part of your building when you make a change in another. So I'll go over highlights of each of these 8 different categories in a minute. What's, of course, important to point out here is that certification to the Green Communities program, which includes all these 8 categories, is one option in the OHA QAP. The Enterprise Green Communities program is differentiated from some of the other programs that are included in the QAP by the fact that Green Communities is only focused on affordable housing. We do mixed income, we do mixed use, but there must be a component of affordable housing and the project for us to offer any assistance. And secondly, we don't have a fee, so we raise funds from philanthropic sources to be able to support our team, to support your teams and your area in building sustainable, affordable housing. And of course, our program focuses both on new construction as well as rehabs, single family as well as multifamily, and urban as well as rural projects, all encompassed within this same framework with slight nuances available for each of those different project types. So in order to actually certify, you'll ensure that your project meets all the mandatory criteria that are relevant for your project type, and then you'll get a certain number of optional points, 35 if you're new construction, or a slightly lower bar of 30 points if you're a rehab. And if you were more familiar with our earlier version of the criteria, our 2011 version, you'll know, you'll recognize some differences between that version and the current one that we're working on. In particular, we're more focused on the integrative design process in this version, ensuring that project teams are thinking about how their projects are going to affect the health of their residents and how resilient they will be for severe weather events, and doing something about health and resilience after that assessment has been done in the 2015 criteria. Secondarily, for projects pursuing certification to our 2015 criteria, we're not just collecting energy and water data utility release forms any longer from project teams. We are requiring that each project team actually manage their energy and water data in a way that's readily accessible and that can influence project operations, and share access to that data with Enterprise so that we can do larger programmatic research on the impact that this program is having. But we ultimately want to make sure that you all are getting the feedback of performance data from your projects through analyzing and accessing that energy and water data over time. And then finally, projects pursuing certification to the 2015 criteria must explore best practices of transit-oriented development, offering means to connect to community amenities in more meaningful ways than ever before. So we emphasize this more with new construction properties than with rehabs of existing buildings, but I'll get into a little bit of that nuance a little bit later on when we go into the details of the criteria itself. So if you want to learn more about green communities after this webinar, go to our website. If you go to enterprisecommunity.org/green and then click on criteria and certification, you'll be led to this page, or a page that includes these images. And you can find more information about the criteria by clicking on that picture box, or you can find more information about the certification process and actually moving forward with your application by clicking on that certification portal box. I'm going to show you what you'll see if you click on that Green Communities criteria box on the left of your page right now. And the most important items on this page are the hyperlinks that are included here. You'll see 7 different links that are here. I'd like to draw your attention to the first 2. The first one is a PDF of our full criteria manual, which includes not just the requirements of the criterion, but resources and recommendations and a rationale for each one, as well as an appendix at the back that includes cut sheets and diagrams about some critical air sealing measures. The second one is the checklist. So it's a shorthand kind of Cliff Notes version of what are the requirements of the criteria that you can really use that checklist in your planning meetings with your team. And then direct your attention on down a little bit in the list to the FAQ, which is self-explanatory, and the addenda. The 2015 criteria addenda are minor changes that we've made to the criteria manual since it was published. We don't have many changes, but the ones that we do are included in that document, so I encourage you to check that out. So that's information about the actual criteria and the content of the program. If you want to learn more about the certification process and you clicked on that picture box, you'd be led to a web page that includes these links. And I'd like to call your attention to the third one that's here on your screen, the supplemental document instructions. So this includes very precise information about what we will expect you to submit to us as attachments or supplemental documents when you're submitting your application so that we can determine how your project is complying with our criteria. The other bulleted hyperlinks on this page are templates that can help you satisfy some of the uploads that are asked for in those supplemental document instructions. So with that, that's an overview of a little bit about Green Communities, the framework, the context that we're talking about. We're going to pause for just a second and see if there are any questions so far. It doesn't look like it, and that's just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into an overview of the 8 different categories of the criteria. I'll pause again to see if any questions have come in. Then I'll give a little bit information about the certification process, and then we'll open it up for you to actually give us all of your questions at the end. So please think about preparing some of those. So category 1 is integrative design. We believe that a successful integrative design process really facilitates the design and development team's achievement of their objectives throughout the project lifecycle. So all of the things that you'll be thinking about throughout the design and construction process in terms of what are the best systems to include, what strategies should we incorporate into our project, can be most cost-effectively considered before construction begins. And we call that an integrative design process when you have a number of different stakeholders with various perspectives contributing to the actual design of your process. And we have 3 different sets of criteria in this category. 1.1, which is telling us about the process as a whole. For instance, for goal setting, we'll be asking you to share us information about what goals you have for the project, what type of integrative design process did you use to come up with those goals, and how do you plan to track them over time. The 1.2 criterion, the A version is mandatory and the B version is optional. And this is thinking about how is your project going to impact the health of the residents. At the 1.3, the A version here is mandatory and the B version is optional. And this is thinking through how you can design your project in such a way that it will be more resilient to whatever severe weather events or hazards your project will be most susceptible to. So I'm going to give you a little bit more information about those. For 1.1a, the goal setting criteria, like I mentioned, there are these 3 questions that we're going to ask you to provide a short narrative to us about. So a statement of the overall goals, a summary of the integrative process that was used, and a description of how progress and success against those goals will be measured. We are not going to be making any judgment calls about the content of your goals. We're simply wanting to make sure that you've gone through a thoughtful process to set goals that make sense for you and your team in this way about this. And then for 1.2a and 1.3a, the mandatory versions of these other criterion in Category 1, we're really trying to recognize that for 1.2a in particular, that buildings affect health in either positive or negative ways. And we'd encourage you to think in the design process about how you can maximize positive health outcomes for your residents by decisions that you're making in the design, construction, development, and operations process. So we have a template online that we'd like you to fill out that shares with us what information you've learned, what readily accessible data sets about public health information for your community have you accessed to identify what are the primary health concerns of people in your community, and then how are you going to address that throughout your property. We have a few different pre-prepared options of different strategies that you can select to address your health concern that are incorporated elsewhere throughout the criteria that we'd like you to identify. So it's a pretty straightforward process. It does not require any additional expertise on your team. It's simply identifying the biggest health concerns of your residents and then identifying a strategy that's most relevant in regards to that issue. And then 1.3a is similar, but focused on resilience rather than health. We'll be asking you to identify which of our design for resilience criterion is really most relevant for your project team to include, given what hazards your project is most susceptible to, considering your resident population, your location, et cetera. So these criteria that I've discovered, 1.2a and 1.3a, are new and different for the 2015 criteria compared to previous versions, and I'd be happy to answer any further questions about them. Moving on there to Category 2, this is location and neighborhood fabric. So locating a project within an existing neighborhood and in close proximity to infrastructure, transportation, and services encourages more resource-efficient development of land, reduces development costs, conserves energy, and adds to the vitality of the overall community. This is a fairly long category. I've only included a few of the criterion that are included in this category here on your screen, but it gives you a sample of the different impacts that we're trying to achieve through this category, from information about density in compact development to proximity to services to access to transportation. I want to point out that rehabs of existing buildings are exempt from the mandatory criterion in this category because we want to encourage the reuse of building structures and recognize that they are not always ideally located. But new construction properties are required to ensure that they're located in a prime location so that residents will be able to access what they need to have a life that's rich and full of access to opportunity. New construction projects are also required to ensure that they have some ready access to transportation. So this is the one point in our entire program where a criterion that is really listed as optional is almost required. So new construction projects are either required to follow through with criterion 2.8, which is access to public transportation, or earn 8 optional points through a selection of these other 5 criterion here if that access to public transportation criterion is just out of reach for your project. So this should give you some flexibility and yet also ensure that all projects certified to green communities are located in a way where residents can access jobs and services and community amenities. Moving on to Category 3, this is a fairly short category, and all the criterion that are in this one are listed on your screen here. We know that low-impact design and development principles minimize the site's environmental footprint and also lower infrastructure costs associated with stormwater management. Many of the criterion that are found in this category have become more standard practice for affordable housing developments across the state of Ohio. We don't get many questions about the mandatory or optional criterion in this category, but it's important to look closely at, especially if you are providing landscaping or irrigation on a regular basis on your site. Moving on to water conservation, this category is focused on water usage inside of the building. We cover exterior water usage in that previous category with irrigation. The Category 4 water conservation really translates into direct utility savings for residents and building owners and conserves a precious national resource. The average residential household in the United States uses 41 gallons of water per person per day, which is astounding. And as designers and as developers, we can help to reduce that average amount of water used per person per day by speccing highly efficient fixtures, by evaluating for and managing any leaks in our properties of water, by designing our actual plumbing layout to minimize needless losses of heat and water between source and use. We can also think about water reuse, and then in criterion 4.6 here, access to potable water during emergencies. This is something to consider, especially if you have a higher rise building, which requires electricity to operate pumps to bring water to higher floors in your property. And if you were ever to lose that power, the folks living on the higher floors would lose the ability to have potable water in their apartments. So this is an optional criterion where we'd encourage you to think about how you can have a publicly accessible way on a lower floor of the building for all residents to access water in their property regardless of power loss. We also have a few different options under this criterion for properties that are not high rises that we'd be happy for you to consider too. But this is a fairly new optional criterion that we'd encourage you to check out. And I will say that over the years, as we've certified projects across the state of Ohio, we see teams choosing to achieve optional points most frequently in Ohio in that advanced water conservation category, which is particularly relevant given rising utility rates for water in the state. I do want to point out a part of our addenda that we released last year about water conservation, and it's about how the mandatory 4.1 water conserving fixtures criterion relates to the optional 4.2 advanced water conservation criterion. This is essentially saying that you can achieve points through including aggressive measures to reduce water consumption in your property by looking at the total amount of water that will be used in your property or your apartment, rather than looking at a fixture-by-fixture basis of what are the specs. So, for instance, if you have an existing building whose toilets were just replaced a couple years ago and you're not planning on replacing the toilets in the rehab that you are planning on now, that's okay, as long as you have very efficient faucets and shower heads, for instance. you can still achieve a high level of water conservation without replacing those toilets that may be not meeting the specs that we've labeled, but are fairly efficient in the long run. So we've said that that is fine to do as long as any new toilets, shower heads, and faucets that are installed in the project are WaterSense certified. So happy to answer any questions about that later on. I think this is especially relevant for rehab of existing buildings. So then moving on to category 5, energy efficiency. This is probably the category that we get the most questions on from project teams in Ohio. There are many different criteria in this category, but the first one, 5.1 Building Performance Standard, is really the heart and soul of this category. So 5.1 Building Performance Standard is based upon the premise of let's make sure that you're building or rehabbing your property in such a way that it does not need a lot of energy to operate. The other criterion in this category are focused on ensuring that the things that use energy in your property don't use a lot of energy, that they're very efficient. But we're wanting to reduce the load or reduce the demand through criterion 5.1 Building Performance Standard. There are 4 different versions of this. If you have a new construction property, you'll follow either 5.1A or 5.1B. If you're rehabbing an existing building, you'll follow 5.1C or 5.1D. And then you'll choose A or B if you're new construction, or C and D if you're rehab, depending on actually the height of your building. And essentially, for new construction properties, we're basing the standard off of certification to Energy Star. And for rehabs, we're not looking at an Energy Star certification, but we're wanting to make sure that you can at least show through energy modeling that you've met a certain benchmark or baseline of energy performance in your property compared to a certain code. There are lots of details in these 4 different versions. Happy to answer any questions about them, but I think the 2 words of wisdom that I would leave you with for being successful with this category are, number 1, to partner early in the design process with a HERS rater or an energy professional to make sure that you are designing in the most cost-effective way to meet the energy efficiency requirements in your project, and then work with them throughout the construction or rehab of your property, and then throughout the end and conclusion of the process. But if you don't already have a solid partnership with a HERS rater or energy professional, after this webinar, I'd encourage you to do that, to find one. And if you would like to locate a HERS rater in your area, you can go to either one of these links that are in blue on your screen. Energy Star has a state-by-state list, and then the ResNet website also provides a listing of HERS raters. And then the other bit of wisdom that I'll lead you with is that if you have a property that's either scattered site, single family, or if you have a fairly medium to large size multifamily project, you're able to use a sampling protocol so that you don't have to do performance testing on 100% of all the units in your property. Instead, you can follow a protocol that ResNet oversees to just do a sample of testing throughout your property to save time and funds and still ensure high performance. And so we have guidelines on that sampling protocol on our website on the certification page, and happy to answer any questions about that here today as well. So I'd encourage you to take a close look at 5.1 and partner with a HERS rater as early as possible, if possible. And just to note that HERS raters are a required partnership if you're pursuing Energy Star certification. You can't get Energy Star certification without one. If you're not certifying to Energy Star, you don't have to work with a HERS rater. An energy professional is fine, but HERS raters usually will have the skills that you'll need. Moving on to category 6, materials. Purchasing green materials and reusing materials whenever possible can improve conditions for resident health, improve project durability, and reduce waste and disposal costs. So this is a fairly large category in the program and includes everything from information about the characteristics of products that we'd like you to use in your property, for instance, low or no VOC paints, coatings and primers, adhesives and sealants, to environmentally preferable flooring products. Then it also includes criterion in this category about what to do with the products that you'll no longer use. So we have construction waste management in here, as well as recycling storage for your residents as well. You know, we've really found that over the years, achieving the no VOCs for paints, coatings, primers, adhesives, and sealants has become fairly easy to do in Ohio, but we still get a number of questions about environmentally preferable flooring products, specifically where can or should you install carpets versus other flooring types, how should you clean them, what maintenance schedules should you establish, et cetera. So happy to answer any questions about that if you have them. Asthmagen-free materials, criterion 610 is a new one for the 2015 criterion, and we're seeing a good number of project teams achieve that in their certification applications too, so encourage you to check that out if you haven't already. Then category 7, healthy living environments, is the longest category in the program. And this includes everything from ventilation to dealing with environmental health hazards such as radon and lead, to strategies that are about how you can design your property to encourage greater resident health. For instance, these active design criterion, whose titles you see here, 712 and 713, to how do you actually construct or build your property so that it's healthier. I think ventilation kind of fits into that, where installation of those ventilation systems is so critical to their use. And then we have some criterion in this category too that are more focused on how do you operate your property to ensure that it's healthier. So for instance, the integrated pest management criterion here and the smoke-free building optional criterion are examples of that. But you know, reducing contaminants in your property through smart choices in building materials and through setting various policies like smoke-free building policies, as well as optimizing ventilation, can drastically improve indoor air quality, improve project durability. I would encourage you to take on these practices in your next affordable housing project. And certainly universal design and active design measures promote physical mobility and encourage greater frequency and duration of just physical movement, which leads to improved health. I will note that we have issued an addenda about criterion 712, so that actually single-family projects are exempt from that mandatory criterion, because there honestly just aren't many ways that you can design a single-family home itself to promote physical activity within the building. This is something that can be better accomplished through multifamily properties that have common spaces or have multiple levels of living units where you can really maximize and leverage your central gathering spaces and your stairways to encourage more frequent physical mobility throughout the building itself. Of course, we touch on other ways to promote physical activity in category 2 when we're talking about access to pathways in the neighborhood. And we also have other criterion within this category about creating activity spaces like playgrounds or fitness rooms in properties as well. But actually promoting physical activity within the design of the building itself, we're exempting single-family properties from that mandatory requirement. And with that, I'll move into the very last category, which is operations, maintenance, and resident engagement. So educational materials and orientations help residents and staff be more knowledgeable about the features in the property that were designed to deliver health, economic, and environmental benefits, and actually to achieve those benefits, as well as the role of residents and staff in realizing those benefits in their own lives. So there are only 6 different criterion in this category. The first 3 are creating manuals. We know that manuals aren't the end-all, be-all of sustainability programs, but they are really the core and the backbone of ensuring that information can be consistently applied throughout a property and the people who work there to ensure that buildings are being operated in a sustainable manner, as well as ensuring that there are emergency maintenance plans in place and instructions for residents about how they can maximize the sustainability features of the property. 8.5 and 8.6 are about project data collection and monitoring. So this is going back to what I mentioned at the top of the hour about collecting and evaluating the utility data of a property to see how it's performing over time, so that operations practices or light retrofits in the future can be fine-tuned to respond to the performance trends that you're seeing of the property as it's being operated day to day. So that's a quick overview of the 8 different categories that we have in the Green Communities criterion. We've done studies over time that show that building in this way is not only sustainable, it's also affordable, both in terms of reduced energy and water bills, but also in terms of not having a heavy upfront incremental cost to implement these measures. The last national study that we did in 2012 showed that implementing these criteria on average was an incremental cost of about 2% over the total development cost of a project, a little bit more than that for rehab, a little bit less for new construction. But it is not uncommon for us to see projects across the country not have any incremental cost difference at all when they're really considering how to holistically approach their objectives for their project in a holistic way. So again, these are the 8 different categories that are included in the criteria. And now I'm going to give you a little bit of information about how to achieve or pursue certification to this criteria. So with the certification process, you're essentially saying that a third party, that enterprise, is verifying that you achieved the objectives of the criteria. So being approved for certification means that you have not only said that you're going to follow this criteria, you've actually had a third party verify that you did. So certification for us is broken up into 2 stages. Pre-build happens before construction, and post-build happens right after you're done with construction. So for pre-build, when you'll submit your application to us, we want to make sure that that happens before construction begins, so that if we have any feedback for you and if you need to adjust your plans or your specs, that you have time to do that before it becomes a costly change order. And at that pre-build stage, you'll give us some basic logistical information about your project, like where it is, how many units it has, et cetera. Then you'll let us know some basic information about how you're planning to implement the mandatory criteria and the optional criteria of your choice. And then you'll upload a few things. So all projects will upload a site plan, a context map, information about energy modeling so that we can make sure you're on the right track for energy efficiency, outlines for those Category 8 manuals that I just mentioned, and then if you're pursuing any other optional criteria that require uploads, you'll send us those as well. But if you're not, it'll just be that site plan, context map, energy modeling form, and Category 8 outlines. Our team will review this for you, and we'll get back to you within 30 days. At that time, we'll either congratulate you and let you know that you were approved for pre-build, or we'll ask you for some specific information that we need to verify whether or not you're actually in compliance with certain criterion. Then you're welcome to resubmit and we'll review it for you again within that 30-day window. After you receive that pre-build approval and you go out and you actually build your property, once you're finished with it, within 60 days, you'll come back into our web portal, our certification web portal, open up your application that you started in the beginning, and you'll essentially update it. So you'll let us know if you actually built the property as you told us you would before construction began, or you'll describe any deviations or different strategies that you implemented that may be different than what you anticipated in the beginning. You'll also upload a few things, some photos of the property, the actual full manuals for operations maintenance, resident engagement, and emergency management. You'll give us access to an online utility data tracking platform that you're using to monitor your property's performance data. And then again, if you're following any other optional criterion that require supplemental documents, you'll share those with us as well. We'll again get back to you within 30 days, either asking for a little bit more information or letting you know that you're certified and giving you information about how you can get a plaque to demonstrate your achievement. So in order to actually do this, to submit your application, you'll go back to our website. And remember, if you want to find more information about the criteria, you click on that box where you can find the manual, the checklist, the FAQ, the addenda. Or if you click on the box about certification, here's where, again, you can find the supplemental document instructions, as well as you can actually go into the portal from this page to start your application. If you do that, you'll first be asked for some login information. So you'll share your email address and a password and log in. And if you've logged in the past, you'll be able to see all of the different projects that are associated with your account. If you've never logged in before, you can start creating new projects to be associated with your organization. And we can add any number of different individuals and people to different project applications in the system. So if you want 5 different people to be working on the application, we can certainly make sure that all 5 are connected and have access. So it doesn't just have to be the responsibility of one single person. If you are creating a new project, you will click this orange button that has this pink circle around it that says create a new project, and then you'll have to answer 2 questions before you're allowed to really start digging into the individual criteria. First, you will select the certification template, and there are New York versions of the certification template or the national version. You'll choose the national version. Then you'll let us know about your construction type. So are you new construction, substantial rehab, mod rehab? And then you'll let us know if your information about your location. Are you rural or are you urban, suburban? And based on your answers to these questions, you'll then be presented with a customized certification portal for you to answer information about how your project is complying with the criteria. It's really important that you answer these 3 upfront questions appropriately because it does customize the rest of your application, and we're not able to help you toggle back and forth. So just make sure that you're, if you are an urban project, you select that button rather than the rural one, or you will have to start again. So that is a quick overview of the certification process about pre-build and about post-build. I wanted to point out that in order for you all to meet the deadline for OHI's QAP this October, the last date that you can submit your pre-build application to us will be September 15th. That will give us enough time to do a review, get it back to you, and if needed, have you resubmit and have us get it back to you again before that October deadline that OHA needs to see your pre-build approval. So we would highly encourage you to submit earlier than September 15th. but that will be really the last date where we can confidently say we'll be able to get your review back to you in a timely manner for you to meet the OFA deadline. And that date is also included in all the information on OFA's website, so hopefully this is not the first time you've seen it. So I think with that, we're nearly done. I just wanted to point out that the other great trove of information on our website is if instead of clicking on certification and criteria, you click on tools and services, you'll have access to all of these 10 different categories of resources, which can be really valuable if you've never certified to green communities before. So for instance, under charrette tools, you can find agendas and guidelines and templates for holding charrettes in integrative planning process meetings and sessions. Under resident engagement, you can find a template resident engagement manual. And if you use that template, you will be meeting all of the requirements of our resident engagement manual criterion. It'll just be customized for your property. Similarly, with operations and maintenance, there's a template for a green O&M guide there that you can use to customize for your own project. The research and evaluation section can be really useful to find out information about the health benefits and the cost implications of building to this criterion. Construction spec templates at the bottom can be useful if you're putting together a bid package. We have translated all of the information in our 2015 criteria manual into master spec format and included it in an editable document for you there. So if you'd like to cut and paste different master spec language for the criterion that you're pursuing in your project into your bid packages, you can find that there. Under tools for resilience, you'll find some great information about developing emergency management plans. And then technical assistance database has a listing of different green building consultants that you can sort by geography and focus area that can perhaps help you on your green community certification project if you don't already have a solid partner. I will note that we are due for an update of this technical assistance database, so I'm sure that there are other firms perhaps nearby to you that would also be fantastic partners that are not yet included on that TA database, but at least that's a start for you to identify a partner if that's what you need right now. So with that, I'll stop and happy to answer any questions about the criteria, the certification process, or anything else you have in your mind about green communities right now. And before looking to see what questions have come in, I'll just note that the best way to get in touch with our team is through this email box that you see on your screen here, certification@enterprisecommunity.org. That's checked several times a day, regardless of who's in the office or who's sick or on vacation, and we strive to make sure we get back to you within a day or less with a response. So if you think of questions after this webinar is over, please send them to this email address. But Donna, do we have any questions so far?
Looking at the Q&A box, I'm not seeing any at the moment. Just a reminder, if you have a question, you can type that into the Q&A box, which is located on the lower right-hand side of your screen. And we'll give it a few minutes maybe to see what comes in.
Okay.
Also, while we're waiting, just a reminder that this session has been recorded, so in case you missed any part of it or want to pass it along to a friend, the link for the recording will be made available to all attendees. We try for 24 hours. It might be 48, but it will definitely be within the next couple days.
Just say that in general, we've been seeing really great applications come in, really thorough, complete, thoughtful applications come in from Ohio project teams. So we're always happy to see them come through. So it looks like we have a first question. So do you offer a webinar that will help with the upload documents? That's where I struggle. It's a good question. So, you know, I'll answer that in a couple of different ways, I suppose. So if you're interested in what do you need to upload, the best way to, you know, find that list of things is if you go to our green website, click on Criteria and Certification, and then click on the Supplemental Document Instructions. That's actually an Excel file that's broken down into a couple different columns. The first one shows what's required for you to submit at pre-build. The next one is if you're pursuing an optional criterion that's associated with an upload, what is that you would need to submit at pre-build? And then what's required at post-build and what's optional at post-build. So if you're just curious about what am I really needing to submit, that is the best source of info for that. As to actually how to go about uploading it to your application, when you're going through your application, after you put in the basic building overview, project overview type information, then you'll go into the section which really you'll be selecting and providing us more information about what strategies you're using to meet the criterion. And then one of the last sections is uploading certain attachments. And it's a click and upload type situation. Sometimes we do have issues. If you have a very large file, there might be an error in upload. So I think if you have a more specific question that I haven't answered right now, if you could just shoot us an email at that certification email address, we'll give you a call and can walk you through just one-on-one to help resolve whatever your issue is. So it looks like there's another question. Is there a required method of utility tracking, or can we utilize our existing tracking methods? That's a great question. Essentially, we do want to be able to see utility tracking for information that is uploaded on about a monthly basis, where you can see both the utility usage for the property at large as well as broken down within the property. So individual units or meters as well as owner-paid accounts. You know, in our portal, you'll see that the 3 options that you can choose that we've kind of pre-populated for you there have to do with 3 different utility tracking software programs that we see most frequently around the country, and that's Energy Star's Portfolio Manager platform, which is a free platform maintained by DOE. There's WeGoWise, which is a fee-for-service platform out of New England, and then Energy Scorecards, which is out of New York City, managed by Bright Power. So those are the 3 main options that we give you to select from in our system, but we're not looking at those 3 exclusively. We'd be happy to consider another platform if you could share with us information about what it is tracking and ensure that we would be able to log in and access the information as well, so that we could include that in studies that we do that look at the performance of properties of green properties compared to non-green properties. So we want to make sure it's a system that both you can use on a regular basis to evaluate the performance of your property and that we can use for some of those evaluation reasons. But, you know, we've seen project teams come in partnership with local universities where classes or professors are focusing on this in partnership with affordable housing developers. And, you know, we've seen a number of other kind of one-off programs, and we're more than happy to consider them.
I am not seeing any additional questions in the Q&A box.
Okay. Well, it seemed like a pretty knowledgeable group from the start, or at least experienced group from the start. So maybe we should just wrap it here, Donna. Please, again, feel free to send us any questions that you think of after we hang up to the certification email box. And we look forward to reviewing your applications.
Great. Thanks, Krista. And no, definitely no more questions, so we'll sign out. Thank you all for attending, and look for an email with the link to the recording. And thank you for your time today. This ends today's webinar. Goodbye.